Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only No BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Joining me today to share the 10 spiritual books that inspired her the most on her life journey is teacher, author, counselor, poet, modern medicine woman, and follower of the wisdom of the ancients, Shonagh Home, who, as one might expect from her Celtic heritage, is steeped in her ancestral roots and everything that we love about the Celtic lifestyle, I guess one might say. So for the past 12 years, Shonagh has apprenticed herself to the mushroom teachers who have led her into profound connection with the spirits of nature, as well as her ancestral roots, all of which is woven into her flourishing practice. She works psycho-spiritually with clients around the world, and she also hosts online counseling sessions and retreats. She's the author of 3 books, which we will discuss later in the show, and she's the host of the Mushrooms Apprentice podcast. Shonagh, welcome.
Thank you, Sandy, so much. I'm happy to be here.
So that is a great title, the Mushroom Apprentices podcast.
Thank you.
What are you talking about on that? Obviously mushrooms, but are you interviewing people about psychedelics?
Well, yes, and as an apprentice, many other subjects as well. So the fairy lore of the Celts, alternative healing, all the areas of interest, natural law, the trivium, all of these things that I really began to study in earnest for these past over 12 years now, where I've been sort of apprenticing myself to these spirit teachers. So the podcast covers all that. So it's not strictly psychedelic.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that later in the show. First of all, tell me about your relationship with books.
Well, books, I've always cherished them since I was a child. Fortunately, we grew up in a family that read a lot of books. And to me, they are teachers. And I have a library, a large library, and the books are arranged by subject. And I'm kind of in between homes right now. I mean, I'm living in a place, but it's temporary. So a lot of my books are in boxes, which is difficult because I refer to my books. And I was looking for a certain kind of book the other day, and I could not find it. And I realized it's buried in a box. I'll just have to wait. But I can't also imagine giving them up. You know, I mean, if I have to get rid of things when I'm moving, my books stay intact. Yeah, they've served me very well over the years.
What was it like for you having to pick just 10 books that inspired you?
You know, it's interesting. It came about much easier than I anticipated, because the first book I remember, it was so easy to remember because it was The Mastery of Love, which I'll speak to in a few minutes. And my marriage was falling apart. And I was around 40. And I call that time of my life the midlife face slap, when just everything kind of went down the toilet, my marriage, everything. And it was a very alchemical time. And then that was the catalytic force. And it sent me into this deep, deep exploration. So that book was just a godsend, truly a godsend. And then as I went forward, because my 40s I continue to be a student of the mystery, but my 40s, oh my goodness, I was working with some very impactful teachers. And so that led me to these other books. So I just remembered because they had such an impact. And that is the beauty of a book, is that it can impact your life and it can change your life in profound ways.
Indeed, yes. So The Mastery of Love, A Practical Guide to the Art of Relationship by Don Miguel Ruiz, published in 1999. Tell us, what was it about that book that impacted you so much?
Well, Don Miguel Ruiz is bringing forth the Toltec wisdom. And he is a Nagual. He is a medicine man, a wisdom keeper. And this book explored the nature of love, but also of how we are creators. We are sons and daughters of the Creator, and we create with our thoughts, we create with our feelings. We all have a childhood. Many of us have childhood wounds, probably all of us. And those wounds form our belief systems. And he's saying that the human race has a disease that's called fear. And so fear would be the opposite of love. And so it was such a concise, just simple, pure explanation of how that fear poisons us, how our belief systems poison us, and then how that informs our relationships, and then all the ways in which that kind of falls apart until we can develop a level of awareness. There were 3 phases. He said the first is that self-awareness, to realize, look, this is all a dream, and everything you're telling yourself, you're stuck in the past and you're creating the future from the past. And so you have to first have that awareness. And then beyond that comes what he called a spiritual transformation. When you realize I can transcend, I can wake up from this dream and I can transcend this. I can make changes that back in that sort of old mind state wouldn't even occur to me to be able to do. So it requires some kind of transformation. And then after that, he spoke of, then you have to be able to control your responses. So there is this personal responsibility with like owning our stuff, and also not, going into response with every single thing, but like, whoa, what, just slow down, take a breath. Remember that person's in their dream as well. It was just the ultimate manual. In my mind, I thought, anyone who's going to enter into a relationship needs to read this book. And it's not complex. And I love the academic, the complex. I almost put one of Edward Edinger's books on this list. And I was like, no. I think we'll pass on that one for now. But yet truth is so simple. It's very simple. It requires no sense. Yeah, you hear it and you're like, oh, God, of course. And so that's one of those books.
Yeah. And I can imagine too, you said that, anyone in a relationship, but I would think anyone exiting a relationship would, it would be like having the best counseling in the world, because, we so badly need help at that point in our lives. Yeah.
Yes. And that book is still selling beautifully. And that is a tribute to the truth that is held in that book. People clearly recognize that, and it has an impression.
Mm. So number 2, The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. Big classic, 1949.
Yes. Yeah. And so, of course, the hero's journey. And so, which we all have, whether it's grand or small, it doesn't matter, right? We all come here essentially to make that journey. And so there is, and it's often someone who's had a wounding in their childhood, they've been cast out or whatever the piece is, right? And then they have to have this adventure, if you will. And there often is, that hesitation, and then they move forward. And then, I'm just talking to sort of, we all know this, and this sort of the sage arrives, whether it's, in the form of an elder, or it could even be a spiritual kind of experience where then you have this spirit kind of guiding you. And then come the demons or the dragons, whatever it is, that challenge that the hero or heroine has to face. And for that, you have to face that alone. And then this transformation occurs, and then you go back and you have changed. And Joy was a Johns Hopkins trained MD. I'll talk about his book in a moment, but he would refer to that often. And he would talk about the importance of initiation, and the hero's journey is where you are. And life will initiate us in a myriad of ways, and the importance of that. And he would say that what our Western culture is missing is the formal initiations of the adolescence that we used to have.
Yes.
The mother would kiss her boy goodbye, knowing the boy will die. He'll have the initiations, usually harrowing, but he comes back a man. And then for our girls, there were also many initiations for them when they started their menses, and they would join the women and, you know, learn the magic and the wisdom and all of, I mean, they're just beautiful. And so the way Campbell does this, of course, is he was a university professor at Sarah Lawrence, and he was a mythologist. And so he brings, it's the hero with 1,000 faces, because it's that same story all around the globe. In every culture, they have their version of this. Yeah. And so that it was very, I found that very affirming. I read that in my mid-40s when I was working with Brew. And that is the kind of book that you definitely want to return to. But just to realize, okay, I can look at this situation in my life as, oh no, this is happening to me, and this is very difficult and scary. Or I can look at this as, I'm being initiated, and this is a powerful experience, and life is teaching me and growing me. This is an opportunity to develop and change in powerful ways. And so that book illustrated that for me in a very profound way. Just absolutely, it's a masterpiece.
It is a masterpiece. And those rites of passage that we've lost, you know, they're so important. So important. So book number 3 is a book that formed the foundation of the psycho-spiritual work that you do. And it's called Avalanche, Heretical Reflections on the Dark and the Light by Ban Draoi, MD, published in 1992.
Yes. So Brew was my teacher I was very graced to work with him for 3 years. And then he went off to work with his teacher later, and then came back. And then unfortunately, a cancer that he had earlier returned, and he passed away. But I had 3 years very profound with him. And so this book, his first 2 or more decades of teaching, he was in this sort of Christ light awareness, and he wrote a beautiful book called Joy's Way. But Brew would say the deep psyche demands balance. And so then came the essential stage where he had to look at the shadow. And so that book, Avalanche, opens up with 2 dreams. And the first was as a boy, and he dreamt that he was outside and he saw the Christ. And he was so excited. He was like, I'm going to follow this man. And he runs in to tell his mother and his family, and they couldn't care less. And he realized, okay, I'm on my own here with this. But he was in that kind of mindset. Well, then the second dream came to him. I think he was in his 40s. And he's at a gas station. He sees an elder man. He sees a bunch of Hell's Angels, but he's like, it's in the middle of the night. And he's like, oh, I'll probably be okay. But then he gets this sense of a presence, and it's evil incarnate. And he freaks out, and he runs back to his car, which is white, so the dreams are highly symbolic, and that's symbolizing his innocence. And he gets in his car, and he rolls up the window, and he locks the doors, and he looks in the rearview mirror, and evil incarnate is sitting in the back seat. And he said he woke up screaming, and it took him years before he could even talk about that dream. But that was kind of his initiation into ultimately the unconscious. So we're in our conscious mind right now. This is our personality. It's the surface consciousness. But then we have this rich, untapped, uncharted territory called the unconscious, or the deep psyche. And it is where so much of us, the wholeness resides, but we're unaware of it. And we're unaware that it is packed with resources. That said, these resources within the unconscious can either illuminate and bring greatness, or they can utterly destroy us. And so that entire book is sort of exploring kind of what this is, and also to redeem those shadow cast out parts, because we don't want to look at that. So it gives you this much larger, broader understanding where, at some point you get to a level of your maturity where you don't get to be in preference. You have to look at the all. You have to consider the whole story. And also that unconscious of ours is connected with the collective unconscious. Like, it's all there. And it is rich territory. And also dreams are a doorway into that. And Brew would say you have to kind of shift states of consciousness to even understand a dream, because it's not speaking, obviously, the way we are are speaking. And there are other ways of accessing that as well, psychedelics being one of them. And so, yeah, it's just a fantastic book. And it also helped me because Brew was a master at understanding dreams and kind of taking them apart in a way that it was jaw-dropping. It was so astute. And so he does that in his book with a few different dreams. And that as well, for me, was very instructive because I had the teaching from him. And he would say you really need to be sort of inducted into that. It's not, you don't just open a book, oh, these are the symbols. This means this and this. Well, no, that's far too confining. That's actually not how dreams work. And that one symbol could mean very different things for, different people. So it's a really instructive book for people who are interested in shadow, interested in working with others, with the psyche. I cannot recommend it enough. He's a powerful teacher.
Book number 4, also by one of your teachers. You call it your teacher from the ethers. How to Know Higher Worlds by Rudolf Steiner, originally published in 1904.
Yes. Well, I discovered Rudolf Steiner when I decided I wanted to learn beekeeping. And I found this woman just randomly online who happened to be doing a class that weekend. This might have been a Tuesday or Wednesday. And so I took my young daughter with me, and it turned out she was a biodynamic beekeeper. And this is something that Steiner came up with back in the 1920s. He didn't call it biodynamics. But in any case, I remember saying, who's Steiner? Who's this Rudolf Steiner person? And so, of course, get home and I start researching. And he's written many, many, many books. But this book, How to Know Higher Worlds, this is about the preparatory phase, which I was ripe for. I was working with Brew at the time, and I just really wanted to understand this. And so he, in this book, says there's 3 kind of initial phases. There's the preparation, illumination, and initiation. And all these books seem to have kind of a thread, I noticed, all 10 of these books, by the way. And so we all have 5 senses that we use, but then we also have spiritual senses. So this is about developing the spiritual senses. And Steiner said we all have this innate capability within us. So it's optional. And so if you want to explore this, this is a good intro to this. And so he gives a series of exercises. And something that he stresses also is you must have humility, that the gates to higher wisdom open to those who have humility. And also patience, which I'm an Aries woman. So that's something I have had to really learn over the course of my lifetime. And he said that higher knowledge is attracted to those who have patience. And he also said there is an understanding that, of course, those who seek will not be denied. At the same time, the universe will not open the gates all the way to someone who is not, he didn't use the word ready, he didn't use qualified, but something to that. In other words, this is step by step by step. And if you're not ready for a certain stage, you're not going to get it, because this is the wisdom of the universe, if you will. And so it's was for me a very powerful little manual, because it helped me really understand, this is not a casual, obviously, undertaking. This is for people who, certain attributes are, reverence, also tolerance, which I love, that he was saying, we're part of the whole. Even though you're in this study, it doesn't mean, you just live inside of a cave. We're part of this whole life. So we want to have compassion for others. And he gave an example that if your student doesn't get the lesson right, one teacher might blame the student, but through this understanding, you would look at yourself and think, all right, where did I fail my student here? Because he's not understanding this, right? So that depth of compassion. And also he stresses in there, and this really hit me, that just as actions are important so too are your thoughts and feelings, that you can feel like you despise someone, but you never say a word. But doesn't matter. The energy of that thought is there.
Mm.
That's a frequency. And on some level, that person receives it. So there's this whole piece in terms of, being very self-aware and mindful, kind of on ourselves, with this sort of spiritual vigilance. So yeah.
Tell me how biodynamic beekeeping is different.
From regular beekeeping? Well, it's not as, shall we say, intrusive. You're not cracking open the hive every, single week. You're really allowing the bees their beeness, if you will. There's no breeding of queens. And there's a book on bees that Steiner, it was from a series of lectures he gave in the 1920s. And he spoke to the queen breeding back then. They were just starting to do it. And there was a beekeeper in his audience, and they were having a little, toe to toe, the two of them. And the beekeeper was singing the praises. And Steiner said, well, essentially that's one of those things that sounds like a good idea at the time. But he said, we will revisit this conversation 100 years from now. And you will see that they have weakened, because that's the hubris of man, to think, oh, we'll figure out, and we'll just mater with whoever. And that's not how it works in nature.
Yeah.
So yeah, biodynamics also is following, nature, but also working with the spirits of nature, the intelligences of nature. And so the biodynamic beekeeping is a very different approach. And you're also let them build their own comb. They're not on the plastic, sort of man-made comb.
As it should be. Yeah.
Yes. They're
as nature.
Exactly.
Yeah. So book number 5 is The Emerald Tablet, Alchemy for Personal Transformation by Dennis William Houck, published in 1999. And you say that this was pivotal for you in your explanation of the soul.
Absolutely. Yes, because, okay, so the other thing, growing up, and I still manage this, but I have been plagued at times with crippling self-doubt and also chronic worry, which it wasn't until recently when I realized, I think that's anxiety. And I work with people with anxiety, but I never sort of label. So I've just had this quest to really know the self and understand my own inner workings. And so much was changing for me through my 40s, so that when I found that book, which is just a gold mine. So the Emerald Tablet, this is the wisdom of Hermes Trismegistus, and it's 7 stages in alchemy. And we think of that as turning lead to gold. And this is the lead of the self. So it's an interior process. And Dennis William Houck wrote that book, and that man is absolutely brilliant. And he has such an extraordinary understanding of these processes, and also tells his own story, which I love teachers who share their own personal stories on his alchemical transformation. And so anyone who is interested in that, that's the book to get. Like, I recommend it to psychotherapists and regular folks like ourselves who just really want to understand the self, and of course the other people that we work with. So you realize, oh, this is what's happening in life. Okay, this person is, so the first one is calcination, and that's the burning away of the dross, and I call that the crisis. Like, that's when just like everything blows up in your face, as it's designed to. And then the second phase, dissolution, that's where it's the dissolving, like how you were before, that's the way. And water is also symbolic of the emotions. And so that's all the emotions come up. And boy, you are just like a cauldron simmering. There's a lot going on. And then after that comes the separation, where the old self is leaving and this kind of new part of you is being revealed. And then following that comes the conjunction. And that is, it's the union of the masculine and feminine. It's like these, so what's left and sort of the essence of you come together now. And we've got this, like, you've been changed, clearly. And yet, so that's the first stone, the alchemists call it. And then after that, because there's more, comes the fermentation. And that is known as a fire in the, is it the fire in the stone? I'm not sure. I have to look. In any case, fermentation is where you're meditating, you're praying, you're really seeking very deeply. And that's causing a change, because now what you want is that connection to the higher worlds, if you will, the higher knowing. And then following that is a distillation, which is continuous, of just this kind of burning away, more and more awareness, understanding, connection. And then the coagulation is, I mean, that's essentially the phoenix rising out of the ashes. You know, you've been utterly changed. And so there's, you know, all manner of examples of that over the course of people's lives. And so it's just such a relevant, profound book, and he explains it in a way that people can understand. And then, of course, there's so much alchemical imagery through it as well. And there's a lot. I mean, it's a thick little tome, and absolutely superb book.
Well, we're going to take a short break now. You're listening to a No BS Spiritual Book Club interview and sharing the 10 books that had the biggest influence on her life journey. Today is modern medicine woman, teacher, author, counsellor, and follower of the wisdom of the ancients, Shonagh Home. We'll be back with more from Shonagh Home after this break.
Om Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting Om Times Media's flagship radio show, What Is Going On, and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy, and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit sedgbeer.com. Click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Shonagh Home, book number 6, The Kalian, anonymously written by the 3 initiates in 1908. I don't think anybody's ever discovered who they were.
I read it was, I think they did discover at some point, or they think they know who it was, a gentleman, and I'm sorry, I cannot remember his name. But I do like the anonymity of it. And so that book, I think, goes very well with the Emerald Tablet. And again, just wanting to know the eternal question is, who am I? And what is this? What are we a part of? And so the Kalian goes, it's more of the Hermetic understanding. And this is explaining kind of the forces of what we are in. And so the first Hermetic understanding is mentalism, so that all is mind. And so God, if you will, is and this is something also the Emerald Tablet talks about this at length. God is known as the one mind. And so that's the will, that's the idea. And then beyond that, you have the one thing, which is the imagination, the inspiration. It's this formless force that then makes what the mind has thought of. And I just love that. And so you have this rule in the Kybalion, all is mind. So we're in essentially the mind of God, and the mind of God is within us. And I always say we are sons and daughters of the Creator, so the apple doesn't fall far. And so we've got this mind here that is comes up with these thoughts, these ideas that we create with as a result. So that's the first one. Mentalism, and then correspondence, so everything kind of corresponds with so, and that's as above, so below, as below, so above. So this understanding that, this is all kind of a harmonic that we are in. Everything relates. Mentalism, correspondence, vibration, everything vibrates. And absolutely everything, even my chair that I'm sitting on, everything has a specific vibration. Polarity. And that I thought was very interesting because, we think in terms of opposites, but actually polarity says they're on a long line. So just like a temperature, you've got hot and cold, and then it's just it's a matter of sort of going up or down, up or down that line. So in other words, it's all related. These are opposites. And something I learned in the Kybalion, I'll just quickly share because I just love this. And as someone who's dealt with the anxiety, he said, you have to think in terms of opposites. If you're in that anxiety, what's the opposite of that? Trust. And so what you would do then is you would feed the trust, because they're just opposites on, so then you're going up, 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 up in trust, and down, down, down in anxiety. And you can do that with anything as long as they're opposites. So I just want to pass that one because that helped me greatly. And then you also have rhythm, and so there's tides to things, and then gender to everything. On every plane there is masculine and feminine, and so they relate to each other. And then there's cause and effect, and so we think of that as karma. But that is the kind of book also you can read over and over again. It just really deepens your understanding that, look, we're in an intelligent universe, and this is not accidental. It's not random. It's actually highly, highly intelligent. And there are these sort of 7 layers of understanding of how things work. And that's, true within us as well. So that book is just a classic, as truth is, I guess you could say, right? I mean, this is very ancient knowledge, and we're so lucky that we have books that we can, that can convey this to us if we seek. Whereas a long time ago, that was not available to most people.
Yeah. Book number 7. I like this. A book that reveals the long hidden female roots of the world's oldest form of religion and medicine. The Woman in the Shaman's Body, Reclaiming the Feminine in Religion and Medicine, by the distinguished anthropologist and initiated shaman, Barbara Tedlock. This was published in 2000. I never knew that originally all shamans were women.
Yes, they were. Yes. I mean, we are designed for it. And especially with the monthly menses that women would have, I mean, it brings you into, and this was understood in these shamanic traditions the world over, it brings you into a very highly sensitive state. So you have greater access, you have greater spiritual power. And so I did not realize also just how dismissed these women were over time. And what I was also disappointed to hear is Mircea Eliade, who was an anthropologist writer who, so many people quote from him, and his work is amazing, but he never actually interviewed an actual shaman. You know, it was deep, deep research, but he was so dismissive of women shamans. And so they were thought of as, oh, a witch or a sorcerer or, you know, the assistant. And so just totally trashed them. And something else that I thought was very interesting was also Michael Harner, she mentions in her book, and he's got a big shamanic school. And so Barbara Tedlock was talking about these women who would go into mediumship, and they would channel through the spirits. And Eliade looked down on that, and Michael Harner did as well. And they just saw it as something like, oh, those women just can't keep their act together. They can't control the spirits. Rather than realizing, you talk about ancient, you know, you think of the oracles at Delphi, and that kind of oracular trance state was practiced by women, shamanic women all over the world. And she does just a beautiful job. I mean, that book is a page turner. It's just absolutely fascinating. And she also had her own initiations in Guatemala and in Mexico. And her grandmother was Ojibwe in Canada. And so her grandmother initiated her when she was young. So this is, you know, in her. And there's a quote from that book that I have used over the years because it really touched me as a poet. She said, "Shamans are seers, oracles, and oral poets, and their artistic language creates a healing path for their patients." So beautiful, beautiful book.
Book number 8, widely considered the greatest self-help book of all time, As a Man Thinketh by James Allen, published in 1902. We have some real good old classics here.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, that's what I do. I'm actually, I think I was born the wrong time, but I love looking backwards, you know, where the sages of old. And that's what I want to do, is just sit curled at the feet of these elder sages, right? And so, yes, so James Allen, that was written in 1905, and he was really moved by Proverbs 27:3, I think it was, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so he is." And boy, did that really spark him, because he wrote, it's only like 32 pages, like this essay. It is so powerful. And he's saying how our mind is a garden. I mean, it's a living thing, and it must put forth. It can't not. So you can let it go to weed, or you can tend it. And the fact is, it needs tending. And so it's a very empowering, inspiring book in that it's saying, look, you can do so much more than you even realize. You've got to get a hold of these thoughts. And in that book, he says, everything that has happened to you is really as a result of the way you think, you know, that you attract to you. And so someone could think of that as, well, I don't know. I see that actually as a very empowering thought, because you realize, oh boy, we are creators again.
Oh yes. Oh yes. Yes.
And so that book emphasizes that, but it does not coddle. And it really stresses, look, you've got to kind of grow up, buck up, and have personal responsibility and really own this, because you can create beautiful things with this mind, or you can make a mess.
You can create misery too. One of my favorite sayings, when one finds oneself getting anxious or suddenly the mood turns, is, who was I before I had the thought? Because it is only a thought that changes it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So book number 9, The Game of Life and How to Play It, Frances Scovell Shin. Or Florence, isn't it? Florence Scovell Shin. Yeah.
Yes.
1978.
Well, she wrote it in 1925.
She did indeed. This is clearly a reprint.
Yes. And another classic, and she was a metaphysician, and she looked to the Bible as a magical manual, which I just find fascinating. And I'm like, gosh, I went to private school run by nuns, like convent school, when I was little. I'm like, why did they know? I never heard anyone, talk of the Bible like this. Otherwise, if I had, I would have actually listened more. And so this book she is teaching people, again, how to use the mind and how to kind of follow the guidance of that that book. And she talks, so it's, again, I think from someone who's sort of, had to kind of overcome things that I've had, these books were really so helpful for me. And that book, actually, I found out about just a few years ago, because I had a retreat client say to me, "You sound like Frances Scovel-Shan." And I said, "Who's that?" And she said, "You don't know who she is?" She said, "Oh my God, you're going to love this woman." And of course, I just, there's so much truth in this book. And so she is advising people, of course, to think in a certain way, that illustrating to them how, your thinking is bringing you this immense misery that you're experiencing. And then she would give, a line from the Bible or whatever. And even that line where Jesus says, "Oh, ye of little faith, if you had the faith of a mustard seed, you could move a mountain." I think she uses that example in that book. So again, this takes work, but that's what we're meant to do this. We're meant to, we've got to cultivate this. And so that book is about doing just that, and very helpful. There are a lot of examples of people who've accomplished a great deal in the face of, great difficulty, because of how that book affected their mind.
Yeah. So book number 10, The Mist-Filled Path, Celtic Wisdom for Exiles, Wanderers and Seekers, Frank McGowan, published in 2002.
Okay, what a beautiful, gorgeous book. So I have been deep in exploring my Celtic roots and the fairy lore and the myth, and so Frank McGowan, he's a poet as well, and he's Scottish Irish, from a Scottish clan, and was raised in Mississippi. And when he starts that book, he talks about just sort of the hollowness of kind of where we're at right now. So I immediately fell in love with this man. I'm like, he's seeing exactly what I see. And he's saying in that book that essentially, culturally, we're suffering from soul loss. And so how do we bring that soul back? Essentially and we bring it back through looking back to our roots and understanding that our ancestors went through horrendous traumas. I mean, when you look into, what happened to the Scottish people and the Irish people, you just will weep. It was so devastating. And so he said, we're here, we survived, but it's kind of like, he gave the example of like being like an animal whose leg got caught in one of those horrible traps and they chew their leg off. So, how do we essentially remember ourselves? And so in this book, he's talking about the Celtic traditions, and he goes into, well, what did the Celts treasure? Let's bring that back. And so, of course, it was this just beautiful connection to nature and an understanding that everything in nature is an intelligence, this animist understanding. Oh gosh, there's just so many beautiful examples he gave of that. And so just turning to our roots, whether that is Celtic or otherwise, Brazilian, wherever you're from, right? But to bring back those traditions, to know your mythology, because all of this, when warriors, when, countries go to war, and whoever loses, they often lose all of that. And then they get taken under the umbrella of the culture that took them over. And so, and I've been saying this for a long time, like, we have to bring back the old gods. We've got to reclaim. I think we're in a time, I know we're in a time where we need to reclaim that. So his book is all about that. And then he gives his own story of going through his own initiation, where he's very, very, very sick. He almost dies. And then has an out-of-body experience. And this old man with this big, long scar down his face is waiting for him. And then a flock of geese come, and then they just lift up, and he's shown all of this stuff. And then he's shown his mother was very involved with a number of Native American healer people, and so was he. And he was shown himself in the Sundance in full regalia. And then that man's spirit said to him, that elder man, you have a choice. You can die, or you can stay. But if you stay, your life will not be your own. So he had to make a choice, and he chose to live. But then he had to dance in the Sundance, and that's a whole story. Anyway, what ended up happening was, through dancing in the Sundance, his ancestors were with him, and he reclaimed his own lineage, and he realized he was shortchanging his lineage. It's profound and inspiring. And he talks about how all of us are kind of wanderers. We're away from our clan, our culture that we that was intact, used to be intact. And so it's a beautiful, beautiful book. He's such a good writer. I highly recommend that book.
So that is your 10 best books. Now let's talk about you. You've 12 years, you've apprenticed yourself to the mushroom. What have you learned?
What have I learned? Oh my goodness. First of all, I have learned that this was the main thing they taught me. The first 2, maybe 3 years, they would say constantly, get your mind right, dear. Get your mind right. It's a mess in here. You got to clean this up. Because this we call a temple. Because this in here is a temple. And all those old belief systems, all those wounds, all that stuff, they're like, that's got to go. That's in the past. You got to clean that up. And also thinking that worry and worst case scenario. So those first, especially 2 years, were about that. Then they began teaching me how to use this. And what has happened is I'm a medium. And so when they speak to me and speak through me, I speak in perfect rhyme. And so these beautiful transmissions, poetic transmissions, flow through. And they refer to this mind as a wand. And they said, one of their transmissions said, for the great wand of antiquity is buried where you cannot see, for you've been told to look outside and not within where it resides. And so they have taught me that this power, just like the Bible says, the kingdom of heaven is within, they have said, the Holy Grail, it's in here. It's not outside of you. This is that all of that is metaphor. This is found within, but you have to go into a place of silence. And so I work with a mushroom. I'm not interested in synthetics or anything like that. But, there's people and they go in, they want music. And so people are selling different tracks of music to listen to when you're in those states. And that's all well and good. Music can be amazing. I do silence. And with the understanding that we are so overstimulated, but also for me, naturally, I just want to go into the silence, into almost like the tomb, if you will, which was what the old seer poets of old Ireland did. They did something called incubation. Their training took place in darkness, in silence. And they would be given the lessons from the instructor. And then in they would go during the day, all day long, in darkness, from Samhain, which is around Halloween time, to the March till when the first cuckoo came about. And then they would be very upset because they so loved this practice, but they would be in that darkness and they would stew on their emotions. They weren't afraid of being depressed. They weren't afraid of longing and all of that. That fueled their poetry. And then they would come up with these just beautiful, beautiful pieces. And so that's really, it's been amazing that it's all kind of culminated into that for me. And I see kind of little whispery echoes of what these people were experiencing. But this is, we want to be inward. This is a wand.
So 12 years as an apprentice, what has to happen for you to graduate from your apprenticeship and become what, a master of the mushroom?
Oh, no, that's such a good question. Thank you for asking that. I don't see any graduation. I see myself that I will be an apprentice the rest of my life. That said, I did find out recently also. So I've apprenticed for 12 years. My first year, I had 12 months in a row of monthly mushroom journeys because I just had to go back. I just was absolutely blown away because I don't do drugs. I don't do, this was just astonished me. So yeah. So let's see. There's no graduation really, but it's been 12 years and this book came about that I've titled Poetic Whispers from the Cauldron of the Otherworld. And so it has flowing through it all of these poetic, not all of them, but a number of these poetic transmissions. I have a number of those that are very personal toward me. And these are personal, but they also, I know, affect other people can relate. They're relatable. And also there are essays in there as well, personal essays. There's a chapter on the fairy lore. There's a chapter on the training. of the poets, the stones of Scotland, and we get into more of, their paramagnetic qualities and creating these energetic fields. So, and now I have to take the book outward. Well, for the past, I'm in my 9th year. I've been doing these one-on-one retreats in my home, just one person, very intimate, like a cocoon, which I love. And that is, I can feel dissipating. And so what happens after 12 years, they're saying, you have this book, now you have to take it outward. And that's another initiation. I'm in those 7 stages of alchemy. I'm in my initiation process because that's not comfortable for me. I mean, yes, I know I can be articulate and I can do this kind of thing. But I think especially with all the COVID and stuff, like I tucked in. And my clients continued to come and I loved it. And they're like, no, you're coming out of that shell, dear. Mm. And too bad if it's uncomfortable, you're meant to share and teach.
Say the title again. It's a very evocative one.
Poetic Whispers from the Cauldron of the Otherworld.
How did you come up with that?
Well, this book came about 7 years ago. I did a version of it, a very small version that I called Poetic Whispers from the Green Realms. But my publisher, which is Logos Sophia Books, and it's a small publisher, and I'm all for the small publishers. They are amazing. And so Steve said to me, Shonagh, this is, there's so much of this, the poetry, these old poets, this is so magical. He said, I just feel like Cauldron needs to be in there because I talk about the 3 cauldrons, which are within us. And so, yeah. And then I thought, I work with beings from the other world. And this is very Celtic, of course, with the she, which are the fairy, and which are not Tinkerbells, by the way. These are very noble, ancient, wise beings. And so yeah, that's how I just kind of wove that together and thought, yeah, this is from the cauldron of the other world. Just as the seer poets of old Ireland, the cauldron to them was the womb. And it was the womb of the goddess Bridget because she was the muse of the poets. They loved her. And so when they went in darkness to come up with a poem, they were thought of it was like you birthed a poem. But they were within the cauldron, the womb of Bridget, conceiving that poem. So yeah, it all kind of weaves together.
And your other 2 books?
Well, the very first one I wrote was Ix Chel Wisdom, 7 Teachings from the Mayan Sacred Feminine, because in my mid-40s, I was working with a beautiful shaman teacher in the Yucatan, Miguel Angel Vergara. And I worked with him for a couple of years there. And again, so I've received messages from people who crossed over. I've felt people cross over. I've just been very sensitive since I was a child. So when I was working with him, I had an initiation there in a cave, and the shaman there opened me to their mother goddess, Ix Chel. And then I began receiving transmissions from her. And so that resulted in this very sweet little book. And so I call that a love letter for women. It's very sweet. And it wasn't published in that. It was sort of out of circulation. And then I had someone contact me and say, listen, I've got a group of women and we want to read that book and do those exercises. And would you consider publishing it? And so Steve, my publisher, said, we'll publish that for you. So that's that one. And then Love and Spirit Medicine was the second book. And that was a result of those 12 months of monthly mushroom journeys, because I was reading every book I could on this, because I was like, what is this? And I was like, where are the books written by women on the subject of psychedelics? I mean, there are a couple, but not that many. It really seems very much, a man's world. And those are great, great books. And I love those guys. But I'm like, where are the women? So I ended up writing about my experiences. And then my marriage was falling apart. And it was such a pivotal, profound year. I went into a dark night of the soul. And it ended up being a book. I was like, all right, I'm going to put this out there. And so I did. And so I think I call it a very raw, vulnerable telling, because it is. But I also feel like women, that's what we do. We tell it. And so it's not, there's a lot of my shadow in there. It's very honest. And also just goes into detail with these extraordinary journeys. And I think also because I don't have initials after my name, I'm not a PhD or whatever, I can speak very candidly about this. And I don't have to worry about losing my funding or my credibility, I could just share a story. But that's also in the Celtic tradition. We're storytellers.
Shonagh, we're out of time now, but it was lovely to hear about your journey with these books. I bookmarked a few that I haven't read that I will have to add to my ever-growing list. Thank you for sharing them with us.
Thank you, Sandy, so much. And thank you again for asking me. This was an amazing process. Just wonderful to review those books. I really appreciate it.
Good. I'm glad you got some reward for the hard work involved.
Absolutely. Yeah, everyone should do this, I think.
Yes, yeah, indeed. So Shonagh Home's 10 best list can be found at the NoBSSpiritualBookClub.com, and you can find out more information about her books, courses, retreats, and her podcast at her website, shonaghhome.com, SHONAGH, home, HOME, love that word, .com. That's it for this week. I'm Sandy Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Till then, it's goodbye from me. Thank you again, Shonagh.
Thank you, Sandy.